So welcome everybody. If you're here to talk about mobilising your round 2 levelling up project, then you're in the right place. And first thing is to say congratulations. It was a very competitive round and you've all done very, very well to get funding. I'm Andrew Laird. I'm the Managing Director of Mutual Ventures, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Sally Grinrod-Smith from West Lindsey Council and Carrie Whelan and Chris Horton from Newham Council. The Mutual Ventures team were lucky enough to work with both councils in bidding for levelling up funding, and we've continued to work with Sally on mobilisation and implementation, which is what we're here to talk about today. I'm also joined by my colleague Mark Bandali, who's worked very closely with Sally. So before starting, just to say this will be a conversation. It's being recorded. There are no slides, but you can obviously access the recording. So we want to make this conversational and relaxed. In terms of housekeeping, there is the opportunity for you to post questions in the Q&A function, and I'll do my best to get to as many of those as we can once we've finished our conversation. So hopefully that makes sense, and I hope what you'll get from today are some practical tips and hints about how to successfully mobilise your levelling up project, because it's not just a project at a local level. You have to engage with central government as well, which is something that we've got experience of doing. So just in terms of round 2, to really put what you've achieved in context, some stats. So there was 2.1 billion awarded to 111 projects, 525 bids were received. So that's just over 1/5 of all bids were successful. So about 21%. Compare that to round 1, where the success rate was 36%. So it was a much more competitive round, and I'm sure you will have seen in the press that some of the criteria changes, often quite late, have been challenged. But you've all been successful, and you deserve congratulations for that. So to begin, I'm going to ask Sally and Carrie and Chris just to very briefly explain what their successful bids were all about. So Sally, could I start with you? You're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Morning everybody, I'm Sally Grinrod-Smith and I'm the Director of Planning, Regeneration and Communities at West Lindsey District Council. And for those of you that don't know, West Lindsey is a rural district in Lincolnshire, immediately north of the city of Lincoln. We're home to around 100,000 people spread across a huge rural area of 447 square miles, one of the largest districts by area in the country. Our main town of Gainsborough is on the banks of the River Trent, population of around 23,000. The town, like many post-industrial towns, experiences some of the most challenging levels of deprivation in the country, and also many issues of market failure that I'm sure you'll all be familiar with. Things like lack of evening economy, high vacancies, low footfall, and real lack of access to public green spaces and poor connectivity. So our bid to the Levelling Up Fund, known as Thriving Gainsborough 2024, was designed through a regeneration of the town centre and investment in our cultural facilities to revitalise the economy and reduce deprivation. And our programme's got 5 key interventions. So firstly, to deliver a thriving marketplace as the centrepiece of the town, which includes a new 4-screen cinema with restaurant and retail units, a refurbished town hall and new public realm in the marketplace. And then we've been expanding our heritage-led regeneration. So we already have a successful townscape heritage initiative, and the Levelling Up Funds enables us to widen the scope and deliver improvements to more listed and heritage buildings in the town centre conservation area. And then placemaking and public realms are a really important one for us. So the delivery of a new pocket park on the banks of the River Trent, an enhanced riverside walk with cafe and coffee facility. Transforming the movement and connectivity across Gainsborough is another component of our bid, where we're upgrading the bus station and delivering a new wayfinding strategy across the whole of the town centre. And then lastly, Gainsborough is known for its housing growth zone status. So bringing new vacant properties back into use in the centre of Gainsborough, but particularly above shops, is a part of our bid as well. We secured just over £10 million in the first round of funding, and we've been implementing the programme for just over a year now. So hopefully the conversation this morning might be of use to some of you.
Fantastic, Sally. Thank you very much. And Carrie and Chris, you did very well in round one and got two projects submitted. So Chris, would you mind just explaining what your two projects are?
Yes, we were audacious enough to put in 2 bids, and I think that was Carrie's idea, really taken forward, and we were rewarded in that endeavour. The first bid, for which we received £20 million, was really focused on the north and central part of the borough, 15-minute neighbourhoods, so a range of capital refurbishment projects and infrastructure investments, including road improvements. And the second bid, which was around connection to opportunity, so both physical connections but also connections to jobs and skills development, was focused more around the southern part of the borough, and that also received £20 million. So we were absolutely delighted with that, and we're now in the process of delivering those projects up to 2024. Carrie, do you want to? Would you like me to talk
No,
about
that's fine, Chris. I mean, I think it just sets out our bids really succinctly, and I think, yeah, we were very lucky. I think we were 40 million from about a 68 million pound bid ratio across the whole of London. So yeah, we were quite pleased with that result, I guess.
You were pretty big. Well, yeah, I mean, it was a very well organised effort by the council, I must say, and really dedicated teams there. It was a pleasure to work alongside you both. Mark, can I just ask you to talk a little bit about how you've been working with Sally on mobilisation at a high level, and then I'll get into some specific questions.
Sure, thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Bandali. I'm managing consultant at Mutual Ventures. And as Andrew's mentioned, I've been supporting Sally and the rest of West Lindsey Council to mobilise their round 1 project, and I've just started mobilise, helping our successful round 2 clients to start that journey around mobilisation. In terms of the support in broad terms that we've delivered, a lot of it is around the project startup, so it's updating and refining the delivery plans, the risk logs, the project logs, and so on, but also helping the design and the establishing of the project team and the governance structures. And really importantly, it's about that review of the bid and really understanding what the council has committed and partners have committed to delivering in terms of timescales and capital investment and assets, but also in terms of the outputs, the outcomes and the impact, and making sure that someone or various organisations are responsible and own those targets so that they can be obviously measured, but also fed back into the performance and monitoring and evaluation process, which is really important from a council oversight and scrutiny perspective, but also equally important in terms of developing that trusted relationship with central government, who rightly and understandably want to know how effectively and efficiently the money is being spent. So an awful lot of effort and time and partnership working with Sally and other councils to make sure that that's embedded at a very early stage. In summary, Andrew, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. So Chris and Carrie, coming to you just for my first question. So I imagine a lot of the attendees here, most from councils are thinking, right, there's a lot of challenges here. So what in your minds were the most significant challenges that you experienced when getting these projects up and running?
I think like everything, you know when you get that you come to that day and you get that excitement of, you've got this money and now you can deliver. I think that very rapidly turns into, particularly for us in Newham, oh my God, now we've got 2. We put them in because we wanted to see where we went, and then suddenly there's this requirement to think, my gosh, the scaling up of resource needed now to deliver those 2 bids is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so you kind of you have to leave the sort of euphoria party very, very quickly and actually just really knuckle down to thinking about how to actually deliver it in practice. And I don't know, but Chris will probably come in on this, but my whole feeling at that time was just this massive galvanization of this sort of action. And you know, almost like, you know, worker bees kind of going around just trying to grab as much resource as possible to just start thinking about some really key elements. And one of the things I'd probably say to people coming into that delivery mode now is that, you know, the one thing that was really quite important for us was to make sure that we really manage that political environment well. So you have to manage it well when you're going into the bids. Believe me, you have to manage it even more when you're actually in that position of having to deliver. And I think one of the things we tried to achieve very, very early on, I mean, obviously we were lucky at the time those bids came in, we had full Labour Party support. So we didn't have, you know, a situation where we have an opposition. But when we went into a May election, for example, we started to see that we had, you know, two minority group, you know, new councillors, but not only that, a whole raft of new councillors that came in via the election. And so, you know, you suddenly then realise you've got to manage that expectation all over again. And so, yeah, just think, one of the things I would say to people is think for the whole duration of your projects, if you are going to start hitting any kind of election process or any change in personnel at elected member level, just think about when you need to make some really key decisions around your projects and really think about, you know, how you manage that process to make sure you get your very big decisions in pretty early. And then if you've got anything that might be in any way controversial, you know, think about how you manage those really key decisions, because your success is crucial in terms of, you know, that member buy-in. And again, don't forget your MPs. You know, they got you there in the first place. Don't leave them out during the delivery process. So that's just something perhaps around political environment that I just might share, but I don't know whether anyone wants to come in at this stage.
Chris, thank you very much, Carrie. Chris, if I could bring you in, because I know that you've been instrumental on the ground driving these projects. I'm sure you've got a really good perspective on this question.
Just to echo really a lot of the points that Carrie made, and maybe to sort of expand that point around the challenge that this poses to local authorities. So of course it's absolutely fantastic news that we have new funding to take forward capital projects, but it also represents a massive challenge in terms of that gearing up. So there was a lot of momentum through the bidding stages. We had excellent expert consultant support to help us through that, but the level of funding that came in, it effectively doubled our capital programme for infrastructure almost overnight. So mobilising new resource around that and then putting together a governance process that is fit for purpose in terms of LUF, but also your existing program. So you have your existing program and then you have LUF, so that the two need to be flexible to one another. That was the only real sort of point. I think Carrie had alluded to it, but yeah, that was the big challenge.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. And then Sally, so the interesting, I'm really pleased to have both councils involved actually, because we have a London borough and then we have more of a rural district. So what were the challenges that you faced at the start?
Not dissimilar, to be honest. I think the scale and the number of the tasks involved in mobilising, whilst also trying to finalise the agreement, the memorandum of understanding with the department and the project management update, which was part of mobilising that agreement. Yeah, there were many strands of work, I suppose, that were in play at that time. Particularly key for us was establishing the programme governance, and as Chris said, anchoring that back into the organisation to give us some real decision-making capabilities and capacities. We really quickly moved to recruit to all of our programme team roles, which was vital for us to ensure we had the resources that we needed to deliver. We needed to review all of the interventions. We were in a similar position where there was a time lag from the bid being submitted to the approval being given. So it was about updating all of our project delivery plans and understanding where we are and if there are any risks and interdependencies there. But also, really importantly, we wanted to get a full approval to spend the funds in place as quickly as we could. So as soon as we were moving into contracting, that was the key decision that we focused on, getting all of our members to support that decision to spend. So we knew we had that certainty in place and we could utilise the governance that was needed. And then lastly, we spent a lot of time focusing on our communication strategy, ensuring our members understood where we were and what would be delivered, bringing the MP back in and all of our stakeholders, as well as all of our internal colleagues who we absolutely needed all hands on deck. So getting that message out to everybody was really important.
Yeah, you mentioned capacity there at the start. So obviously I can see that there are a lot of district councils listening here, and district councils, for obvious reasons, have a smaller corporate centre than a county or a unitary. And obviously we were in and are in helping you, but you had to build up your own capacity as well internally in order to be able to do this.
Yeah, we absolutely did, and we'd identified that as part of the resourcing strategy that sat alongside the bid, that we would need to bring in new members of staff to do the delivery. But really what we've done in West Lindsey is made sure that levelling up's everybody's business. So nobody gets away lightly here. Everybody has a job to do. I've spent a lot of time delivering corporate updates, ensuring everybody knows in the weekly staff messages what's happening and when. We use our staff Facebook page just for that informal communication. So everybody from finance to democratic services to planning to HR, they all have a role to play. And hopefully what that means is everybody actually feels part of it as well now. So they can see the change that's happening and they feel that little bit of ownership. So when I have to call them up for a favour, they're a bit more willing to help me out because they definitely feel part of the fun that's happening.
Well, it is an absolute fact that stakeholder support is really important in this. And Carrie and Chris, if I can just come to you to talk about this, because within the bid you have to evidence support from stakeholders, and I guess, as is natural, that support is given in order to secure the funding. But then once the funding arrives, I'm sure everybody wants to make sure that they get their bit. So how did you manage to engage with stakeholders as you mobilise to make sure that you didn't lose any of that support? Yeah,
I think when you're coming in, I think when you're starting this process, it's really important to recognise who the key stakeholders are going to be to help you deliver this. And one of the things we probably did quite early on, Chris, is make sure that we got meetings together with, because a lot of our projects, for example, are dependent on other partners delivering to time and to budget for it to work. I think the other thing you've got to realise as well, that with the level of the project, you know, it's really important to recognise that you might need as many as plan Bs or plan Cs to delivery of an outcome for a particular project. So, for example, very early on, we were looking at alternative options for some of our sites where we felt they might be at risk in terms of being able to deliver on time. And, you know, if we couldn't work with one particular set of partners on one of our perhaps, you know, less confident projects within that group, could we have a plan B in place so that we could make sure that we could transfer, if you like, to another provider to deliver some of those projects? So, I mean, I think it was absolutely fundamental that all stakeholders, whether it be internal stakeholders as well, you know, the reason why I think we were so successful with the bids was because we had the most amazing cross-departmental delivery team to work with us. And I think, you know, that carries on, so we took the same methods into the delivery, you know, as we did with making the bids itself. And so we've carried on that real one team approach, but also I think recognizing that if you start risk assessing all of those projects, you can see the ones that you need to think, right, let's be on top of, do we need to do this differently? Do we need to work on something else just in case, you know, the first plan A doesn't go right? So that's just a few things that I remember, Chris. I don't know about you.
Chris,
yeah, just I think that, I mean, that sums it up. I think there would just be 2 points. A lot of the projects that were put into the LUF bid were proposals that were existing. So there'd been some engagement already, and that was helpful in terms of continuity. through it, we engaged with a range of stakeholders, but there was also an element within the delivery of what we aspire to deliver, which is around refurbing buildings and making that as a challenge to stakeholders, that if they align with our objectives, if they align with community wealth building, then they have a chance to bid into and utilise those buildings. So there's an element, there's a challenge there to stakeholders as well.
Yeah. Chris, is there anything else that you want to say about the different parts of the council that have to work together? Because, you know, by their nature, these projects, and I know yours certainly are large and complex capital projects, how do you get all the different parts of the council to pull in the same direction, or is that just
so? I think this is where Carrie really helped us to understand the way in which different parts of the council could work together as part of sort of total management approach. So there was quite quickly a steering group set up amongst officers in the bidding stage, where we all came in and offered our ideas, but also practically helped with the bid. And that continued after the bid. So when we were successful, that galvanization, there's nothing like a bid to bring people together anyway, but it continued afterwards. And I think that was really helpful and important to it.
How did you keep the that momentum going? Because I totally get your point about the kind of euphoria of getting the bid, and then everybody sort of, all right, we've got to deliver it now, right? Okay, so that's lots of work. How do you keep the buzz going?
I think partly because it was aligned already to a lot of proposals that the council were aware of. It wasn't totally new to people, so it was great in the sense that we felt there were projects that we could tailor towards Luff, but that people had wanted to deliver for the community for quite some time. That was quite helpful. I don't know, Carrie, if you've got anything else on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that obviously we set up in quite a lot of detail was a huge governance process around the whole approach overall, but also we brought in quite an extensive programme management team. And I think that's really helped, Chris, I think you'd say, keep us on track. And some, managing some of that activity, particularly some of the monitoring activity back to government, that programme management has been absolutely key to the delivery of the Levelling Up programme. So, I mean, you just really, really think about all those, what I call those kind of back office sort of approaches that you've all got to get together to make sure the whole works. So not just the programme management, but, just making sure as well your governance process is watertight. If you can get delegated authorities, for example, from your elected members, so that you can move swiftly through perhaps a board proposition, so that everything gets signed off by a board. I mean, that is a really speedy delivery option for you. So just think about ways in which you can still work with, what is public sector governance in local authority, but actually in a delegated board fashion, means that you can get some decisions made really, really quickly.
Fantastic. Just before I bring Sally in, Mark, do you want to comment on any of that?
Yeah, no, I think they're all very valid points, and go back to the sort of one of the central challenges, which is you've developed a bid over this intensive period, you've submitted, and then there's this sort of 6 month of standstill. You get the award, and then you're told to from first gear up to fifth incredibly quickly. Those challenges, what I thought was particularly helpful in West Lindsey, so I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. One of the first practical things we did was to have a round table on the bid, to refresh people's memories about what it was, but also what the commitments were, what the arrangements were.
Because it's quite a long time ago now. I mean, bids were submitted last June, so
absolutely, yeah.
A lot of people will have forgotten.
Yeah, and when I mean round table, I mean, everyone who's obviously involved in the bid, but support services and other mechanisms within the council who were required to come together to deliver. And that was helpful to refresh people's memories of what was committed to and how things need to work, but also provided the opportunity to identify variants or changes that through just the ways of the world had created conditions which did challenge the underpinning assumptions. So what could be done there to sort of, okay, this is what we thought at the time, this is now actually what's possible, or needs variance. So it helped bring people together. It helped identify where changes need to be made, and it provided some momentum. It was a really helpful nucleus starting point to really to move on with things.
Yeah, Sally, can I bring you in just to reflect on some of what you've heard there?
Yeah, and I think what was really key, and a bit like Carrie said, throughout the bid process, we had a core group that was working up those propositions and developing the bid. And as we came to implement, we drew on that group again, and that's the group that kind of came together to reflect on some of that detail and what was needed to move us from where we were at announcement into full mobilisation. And really that's the core officer group that's continued through the process now and are leading the day-to-day project management that feeds into the programme-wide governance. So I think keeping them involved all the way through and drawing on their expertise is vital. And then adding into the mix of that the external stakeholders as well. So whilst they not necessarily all of them have a role in delivery, that managing expectations, creating a positive message out there in the business world particularly, happens with a lot of our stakeholder engagement. So keeping them up to speed with the detail has been really important too.
And Sally, what about the different parts of, the different responsibilities of the council? Because a district is at a smaller scale with fewer staff, did you think that was easier, or was it?
Whether it's easier or more difficult, I'm not sure. We were really realistic about the resources that we needed from day one to deliver this, and we've been really pleased with the foresight to include capacity within the bid so that we can either bring in expertise where it's needed or we could fund those directly. So for example, we've appointed a monitoring and evaluation consultant that will support us right the way through from now until the end of the programme, and they've been developing the monitoring and evaluation strategy for us. They've been able to support us with a lot of thinking around our baseline data and how we measure that and how we feed that back to government. So bringing in where needed resource has been critical for us.
So I want to get right into what I think will be a significant problem and one that's being talked about. So there's a significant time gap between when the bids were submitted and now. And obviously inflation has played a huge role since then. So does that, obviously that creates challenges. Does it create any opportunities to rethink things? How are you dealing with the inflationary pressures and the challenges that have occurred since round one? Because obviously you're in flight at the minute, so inflation's still having an impact on you. Carrie, Chris, can I come to you first just to get a thought on how you're handling that?
I think it's really important at the moment for local government generally, because local government over the last sort of 10 years has probably not had to significantly deal with any kind of inflation-led budgeting. So this is something that we're experiencing almost, if you look at the age profiles of our management teams, for example, this is something that we're all learning almost for the first time. So I think it's really important that you take an approach to inflation at quite a high level within the organisation. So our Section 151 officer has been looking at how we cushion ourselves with that over our whole budget process as a whole. I think as well, when you look at the projects that we're dealing with as well, construction costs have gone up considerably. And so that's where I think you've got to start doing that sort of risk assessment about what can you deliver? Can you deliver the sort of same response, if you like, but perhaps with a lesser, amount of money that goes into that, but can still deliver the outcome. So I think going through the process, and Chris will probably be able to give some examples of where we've had to rethink things, and provided as well, and it was one of the things that we thought about when we were doing the bids, provided some of your concepts are really flexible in terms of that use, then sometimes you can, that flexibility really works for you when you start to have to rethink, some of those schemes because money is tight. Chris, I don't know whether you have any sort of examples of where that's worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think the example would be Lochnagar Bridge, which is a bridge that will join Tower Hamlets to Newham, or Newham to Tower Hamlets, and there are a range of cost pressures there, not least in terms of the material required to deliver a bridge, but also purchase of adjacent land plots, etc. So there are challenges, very real challenges there. Part of our response is to really step it up in terms of our monitoring and our risk reporting to make sure that we're very much aware of what those costs increase are, and that we're escalating any risks and that we're reporting that into central government. So, you know, that's part of the governance process, which is to be very much aware of this.
I think just one other point, Andrew, if I may, frameworks are really good here. So, you know, if you can get some really good frameworks at the moment that are, you know, they can often help with that sort of inflation aspect, if you like. So it's quite useful to think about how you might procure stuff to help with that inflationary pressure.
So you're talking about getting some suppliers, providers onto a flexible framework rather than a
yeah. I mean, you know,
yeah.
Think about some of the ones that have come out quite recently that may be running for the next, you know, couple of years that can actually just help you ease through that process. Yeah. And you know, there's plenty out there that you not only can help you, but actually speed up your procurement process as well. So.
Thank you. Sally, so how have you found the journey so far in terms of having to make in-flight adjustments and, you know, often driven by inflation and other things? Inflation is not the only driver.
No, absolutely. I mean, the MOU that we've committed to with government does provide some flexibility actually, and the regular monitoring reporting that we're doing gives us the chance to update any issues and any impacts. So that's been well received, and we've developed a good relationship with the department to be able to feed that information in sort of real time when we're managing risks on site. We've done some practical things like being really careful to manage scope creep. What we've found is everybody gets very excited when there's a project on the table and, oh, we could do this and we could do this. And actually we've had to be really, really clear about what it is we want to deliver and the budget allocated to that, so that we don't get carried away and try and add things in that are really not part of the original scope in the first place. We've managed our contracts so far really tightly. Every compensation event's been scrutinised to the nth degree, and we've worked through the detail to make sure we're not sort of seeing costs creeping through that are not necessary. We've also procured an experienced heritage architect. We've got lots of building owners in our Townscape Heritage Scheme, so there's a risk there that both timescales and costs can run away, and we thought that putting a framework in place with a procured expert ourselves would help building owners and us to keep track of what was happening there. We've done a bit of value engineering where necessary and stripped out some of what would have perhaps been nice to haves. They've sadly gone by the wayside, and we've been doing quite a bit of early market engagement with suppliers on some of the larger contracts, so they can see what's coming. They're sort of starting to plan that workload in. And we've also had to get some additional QS support for some of the public realm work that we've done, just so that we're verifying and checking those costs. So a range of ways in which we're trying to manage that practically on the ground are coming together to help us oversee that risk. Really.
You mean QS quantity surveying? Is that?
Yeah, so we're really checking the financial information that we get in at every stage, and understanding where the costs are higher than we expected, or where they were lower, and where we've got some flex in the scope of what we're delivering there, really.
Great, thank you, Sally. Just before I go to some of the other questions, Mark, I want to bring you in here just to kind of, you know, there's a huge amount of information here, and wonder if you could just give people some ideas of what's on that practical to-do list when thinking about mobilisation.
So I mean, there's a lot there. I think, as I've mentioned, I think a round table to analyse the bid and understand what the commitments arrangements were. I think there's something about understanding, just going to the inflationary point, how big the problem is for round two. So round one and round two bids were developed in different times. Round two was smack bang in the middle of the sort of inflationary uplift. There was an emphasis on contingency. So each bid would have allocated, I'm not saying enough, given the inflationary pressures, but there would be some there. But as Sally's mentioned, really accept the point around dialogue with supply chains as well, and or frameworks, whatever it may be, to get a handle on how big this problem is in terms of inflation. And then there's the secondary conversation about how do we deal with it in terms of managing costs or considering the nature of some of the projects. So I think those were all really valid and practical points that those involved in round two could be getting on with. I think that's good points. But you're on mute, Andrew.
I was determined not to do that. But there we are. Someone had to do it, and it was me. So we've got a couple of questions in here. So this first one is one probably Mark for you to consider here. I'm sure others will have a view, but so I'm going to read this. Round one projects had the opportunity to submit changes to government, updating key bid content programme funding profile through a detailed spreadsheet similar to the workbook that was included in the bid. It doesn't appear as if the government will ask for this for round two, despite the delayed announcement. Does the panel have any more information on this or advice on how to formally reset the programme at the outset so we are not monitored against a programme and funding profile that is out of date because of government delays? Really good, valid question there. Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, so just
do we know more about this?
I don't think we do at this stage in terms of the opportunity, the sort of formalised opportunity. But what I would say is all councils who've received LEF funding will be required to hold an inception meeting with central government and then quarterly monitoring updates. Now, the importance is on councils knowing themselves as well as possible in terms of what's going well, where the cost pressures are, where the variance is, and where the risk is. If a council is very much in control of that performance information, it can have very sort of open discussions with central government about where these pressures are. I'm not saying that everything can be changed, but what I am saying is that there's an opportunity to discuss things that could potentially change across the project, whether that's the delivery timescales, whether that's cost pressures. All of these things are, as long as you're clear in your position, there's a decent platform then to have a conversation with central government as part of these set piece events. Obviously, central government will not want surprises, so flagging risks and issues as early as possible, I think, is helpful. But there is a natural platform in which to discuss these issues. And the obvious one is most projects assume that they would be informed of a successful award a lot earlier than they were. So there's an obvious point there to negotiate around timescales.
Yeah.
Inflation is another one, obviously. But yeah, I mean, Sally will have, and Carrie and Chris will have first-hand experience of this also.
So I just want to bring Chris in here. So Chris, there are a few questions around about the same sort of thing here. This one's, how flexible are things when variance is required in reprofile of money, altering outputs, outcomes, etc. If, how flexible have you been able to be, Chris?
I mean, touch wood. We found that central government have been quite flexible and understanding in terms of there was a bid and there might need to be slight adjustment in terms of what is feasible in that immediate period afterwards. So we haven't had any issues there. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I mean, that's certainly been our experience. If that idea of flexibility is extended within the local authority, I think there has been real sort of empathy and understanding between members, senior managers and officers around the, as I said earlier, the kind of level of the challenge of delivering this amount of capital. And there's been a process where it's been sort of thinking about the adjustment to our existing capital programme and bringing in, as I say, a new element to that, increasing the size of it and increasing the challenge, but also understanding the community output, the milestones that are delivered in that area. And that's been very, very well understood, I think, across the organisation. So that's helped with flexibility as well.
Thank you very much, Chris. Sally, have you had to change anything big?
So we've been sort of, as Mark said, I suppose, keeping our own programme really clearly. We didn't have an opportunity to update the milestones and outputs and outcomes when we contracted with government, and it was quite a challenging time because actually we were just experiencing the final, I think, wave of COVID restrictions as we contracted with government. So that hit at a real critical time for us, but we weren't able to update the milestones because of the programme that government were working to. So I think we've benefited because government have been developing the levelling up change concept as they've gone along as well. So we've been able to feed into that and sort of saying to them, look, this milestone's moved back because of X, Y, and Z, but we're here with the programme overall. So it's very much been a quite structured conversation, but not overly demanding from government. I think as long as we've been able to show that overall programme performance and progress against achieving the outcomes that we set out to achieve, the detailed monitoring of slippage of those milestones hasn't been too onerous for us at this stage.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add, sorry, just to add, building on what Sally's just said, the importance is therefore to make sure that councils have the right performance management systems in place, to have the data set, to have the conversation with central government about this. Central government, you know, they respond, in my experience, very well to well set out cases for change and variance. Well, they, you know, they're less likely to respond well to is just, you know, gut feel, or, you know, a strong, robust case for change in terms of variance, I think it has been well received.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to getting that data from the various parts of the project and pulling it into one place and analysing it. And that's very much part of the mobilisation process, I think.
I'm interrupting you. As they've published the assurance process, it's really clear that actually it's a fairly light touch contractual arrangement that they have with local authorities, and the responsibility to deliver an assured programme sits with the council. And the emphasis is there to use your existing governance and use your processes to give that assurance back to government. They're not there to do that really detailed monitoring.
Yeah,
It's our responsibility.
Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, I think in my own approach, and I don't know whether Chris agrees, and whether it was because we were round one, I don't know. I mean, they were still trying to perfect the process as we went along. I think we did feel that was the case. But I think when we were able to change a lot of our financial profile.
Oh, I think we might have just lost,
for example,
oh.
And we were working later rather than sooner. But I think the other thing to think about is, at the end of the day, they want delivery. They want this to be a successful project, so they want outputs. And if you are going in there with a very confident reason why you're wanting to change something, my experience with them was, if they felt you were on top of it, if they felt they knew what you were doing and the reasons why you were doing it, and that was going to deliver effective delivery, then they were pretty good about it.
Thank you very much, Carrie. So there's another question here. I'll read it out here. Carrie mentioned the benefits of frameworks. Can she advise any in particular that were most of use? Does anyone know whether the framework managers are ready for 100+ surge in this? Well, I mean, from our perspective, I think we're being mostly commissioned through MCF3, which has been really handy for consultancy. Now, I guess, there are a lot of different frameworks to cover off everything that's required for these types of projects.
Yeah,
but MCF3 was very useful for us.
I think it depends what you're doing. I do know that Mace has put something together recently for construction, which a lot of public sector are looking at the moment, and it is one that's fairly recently been put together. And I'm not recommending it. I'm just looking at the fact that it looks interesting. And I suppose the point that I was making was more around, if you think about the concept of frameworks, that they've already done a lot of that work for you in terms of costing, then it ought to be able to manage your inflationary pressures better. So it's not necessarily, I guess, thinking, well, who could you recommend? But I mean, I do think there's some interesting new ones out there, and it's worth just having a look, seeing who's on those panels and seeing, whether they're going to work for you, particularly if they've, if they've literally just come on the market, because prior to all the upset, in the summer.
Yeah, thank you. Chris or Sally, do you want to add anything there, or have we covered that?
I think in terms of procurement, we recognised that we would need some support with our procurement strategy, and we outsourced some of the tasks around that, and that's been hugely beneficial, mainly because of speed, actually. You know, we have very limited internal procurement capacity, and we had probably 5 significant projects to get up and running very, very rapidly. So we did bring in some assistance to help us with that.
I guess there's just one quick point, which is whether it's to do with disposing of leases or procurement, what we have been working on, and this is pre-LUF as well, is combining that with what we call community wealth building. So making sure that obviously residents are at the centre of that. So the LUF outputs link to community wealth building, and so that was very much integrated into our approach, which is a time challenge, but is also, of course, necessary to do.
Yeah, Chris, if I could just keep you on the hook here, there's a question here about evaluating impact of the projects, monitoring, that sort of thing. And what steps did you take at the start to ensure that the right arrangements were in place and that you were measuring what you needed to measure?
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, I made the point previously that a lot of these projects and proposals were existing. So some of that evaluation had already been undertaken. The other link is also to a point we made previously around there already being a steering group and governance approach. So we could link into transport and planning to make sure that we got the right milestones and measures to evaluate through that process. So quite early on in it, the selection of the projects that went into it were representative of what the council wanted to put into the bid, but also had measures where we could evaluate the benefit more widely, and then also involving members in that process as to why we'd selected those projects and how we were going to evaluate them.
Thank you very much. So I've got a question here which is a really interesting one for me. So it's asking about the Northern Ireland setup. So did any of our projects involve in engaging with something similar to the Central Procurement Department of the Northern Ireland Civil Service? So unfortunately, none of our round 1 projects were in Northern Ireland, much to my great disappointment, as you can probably tell from my accent. We'd love to do it, but it's an anonymous attendee, it said, but if whoever submitted that wants to drop us an email, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation outside of this, just to see where there are crossovers, because most of the individual project, in fact, almost all of the individual project procurement would have channeled through councils. So the funding would have flown from central government to councils, whereas I know the situation in Northern Ireland was different. So very happy to pick that up separately. So I've got one final question for everybody here, and I always try and let people go slightly early so that they can get to their next meetings. But if you could come up with one thing that you wish someone had told you when you started to mobilise this project, what would it be? And if you've got 2, that's fine. I'll let you away with that. But Carrie, do you want to start?
Well, I think the inflation issue is the big thing, isn't it? Because, you know, you're putting these bids in, certainly from round 1, with an expectation that we were never going to see the levels of inflation that we've got at the moment. So I certainly think was, you know, if we'd have had a crystal ball of
that's a crystal ball one, though. I mean, that's not something you can.
This last year, I think that would have been quite helpful. So I suppose that's one for me. Chris, could you think of any that you think? I think you're on mute, Chris.
The button
not alone. Thank you, Chris.
No, it's the button stuck for a sorry, these things that surprised us or that we hadn't anticipated, is that yeah. I wouldn't like to say we were so well planned that there was nothing, but I think that I was surprised by how well it worked in terms of that continuity between what we were already doing and what we could bring into play. So I don't think there were any sort of major unpleasant surprises from it. The resourcing challenge, which we mentioned as well, I mean, that was something that wasn't a surprise to us, but really made us think about how we get in the correct experts and staff to continue this on.
And I think probably other than 2 bids instead of 1, that might have been a bit of a surprise.
Well, I mean, you know, there's controversy about the number of bids now, so I think you definitely made the right strategic call there in round one. Sally, what would your answer be?
I think largely we got things right as well. Actually, it's been a fairly smooth implementation process. I think one of
that's because your bids were so well planned.
I think one of the things that we've learned is it's quite tough out there. You know, you engage with communities, you engage with businesses, and we're full of positivity and we can see the long-term plan and we know how this is going to pan out. But you stand in the centre of Gainsborough and you don't always see and feel that change that people are really excited about happening. So for me, I think we could have planned in particularly more marketing to tackle some of this in the early stages where we were mobilising and there was a lot of work to do, but people weren't seeing and feeling that on the street. So we've been able now to put in more work into things like simple stuff like artist impressions, time-lapse videos, you know, video case studies, branding, getting that message out there about the little things that are happening more quickly. So we've launched a time-lapse video on our Invest Gainsborough website to track the demolition of the big site where the cinema's going to go. And that's given us a huge amount of kind of community traction and understanding of what's happening. So I think we could have invested more in marketing rather than comms up front to help us through. And it's been quite tough on the team at times to read some of the criticism on social media and that kind of thing. So that's been very much about
I think, do you know, Sally, I think
kind of getting through that so people can see the change.
I think that's an incredibly important point. Public services and public sector organizations tend to be very shy about shouting about what they're doing, but actually it's about making sure that the impact is felt as much as it's not about boasting. It's about making sure everyone's aware of what's going on, because quite often amazing work gets done and nobody notices it. And if they don't notice it, they won't make use of it and all the rest of it. So Mark, what would your thought be?
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, really. I suppose my point is, I think mobilisation, for all the reasons we've talked about, it is challenging, but I think it is critical. To do it, it's intensive, it's at short notice, there's an awful lot to do, but doing an effective mobilisation period will really set up the foundations for the project moving forward. And there is an awful lot to think about. However, getting the resources right, getting the right people to own that bid across the council and a wider partnership, and getting those conditions and that buy-in and that engagement as soon as possible from a standing start, which is incredibly challenging. But I suppose my point is every minute spent on mobilisation is a minute well spent, and the dividends will be reaped in the future, I would argue.
Thank you. I want to give anybody who wants to make any final comments a chance before I wrap things up. Everyone happy? Brilliant. So thank you. Let me just double check. There might be one more question. Yes, a question, can a copy of today's webinar be shared with everyone? That's my number one point in my closing comments here. So we are recording this. We will send the link to the recording to everyone. As I send that email to attendees, if you want a follow-up conversation on mobilisation and what's important, please drop us a line and we can do that. But final thing is just a huge thank you to Carrie, Chris and Sally and Mark. And I hope everybody has found that useful. I certainly have learned a lot myself as well. So the follow-up email will come with the recording. And there we are, 5 to 12. So you've got 5 minutes to get a cup of tea for your next meeting. So thank you, everyone.